Okay, I'm going to call this meeting to order, the Waterfront Stewardship Committee meeting today, Thursday, October 24th at 2:01. I'd also like to acknowledge with respect that we're meeting on the traditional territory of the Lekwungen speaking people and that we're honored to have strong working relationships with the people of the Songhees and Cosaxum nations. So I'll be seeking a motion to approve the recommendation that the agenda of the Waterfront Stewardship Committee meeting of October 24th, 2024 be adopted as presented. Can I get a mover? Great. Thank you, Rick. Any discussion? No discussion? Any opposed? Oh, none opposed? Okay, motion carried. Thank you. Next, I will be seeking a motion to approve the recommendation that the minutes of the Waterfront Stewardship Committee meeting held April 25th, 2024 be adopted as presented. If I can get a motion. Ms. Gibbons, thank you. Any discussion? Errors or omissions? I see none. Anyone opposed? Nobody opposed. Motion carried. Thank you. Okay, public participation. Looks like no written submissions have been received for today's meeting, and no members of the public have registered to speak virtually. We do have one regret today. Sean Macholnik will not be attending the meeting today. So before we move into new business, I just wanted to thank everybody for being here today. It's been a long time, so it's nice to see everybody's faces. I think it's been April was our last meeting. So I'm really looking forward to having everybody here and some good conversation and discussion today. And before we get into that, I just wanted to let the committee know that about 2 weeks ago, I had an impromptu walkabout the lagoon with a couple of committee members. And there were certainly some things that came up that Mr. Borhill will be speaking to today. I have asked him to address some of the concerns that were brought forward to my attention. And I won't get into them into too much detail, but just to give you some highlights on the information that I absorbed and I brought forward to staff. Some of the key points that we were seeking some clarity was the large log that was sitting under the bridge. There was some concern that there could be some damage to the bridge during the upcoming storm season. The construction of log huts that are all over the waterfront, of course, as we come into storm season as well. And there's also a lime rock, and there was a belief that this may have some sort of Indigenous significance. And so seems to be a desire to protect it and preserve it. So we were just seeking some more information about this stone. Also, the woman feeding the wildlife. We do have a bit of an issue with a particular person down at the waterfront who tends to be feeding all of the pigeons, and it's creating quite the sight. So we're looking for a little bit more information on that. I did get an email from Byron Grant, who said that this would be coming forward at council service review, that we don't currently have a bylaw in place that prohibits people from feeding birds. But this is something that we're certainly look at exploring during our service review. So definitely something to keep an eye on. It will be coming up for discussion. The memorial cross that's on the beach, we're looking for an update on that. And then just some further discussion on building groins and the plans for the degaussing. Am I saying that right? Degaussing cables. So these are topics seem to be important for some people on the committee. And so just wanted to update everyone that those conversations were had, and Ian Borhill, I'm hoping will be here. He may have to, I don't see him yet, so we may have to go into new business and then maybe circle back and have him touch on some of these items. I know that we will be looking at, I believe, getting some updates on the biodiversity baseline study that also has happened. And we have, I see Gord's going to jump up and chat, maybe speak to that. Gord, please, yeah, if you can speak to some of these items, that would be great.
Thank you, through the chair. I can speak to some of them that we deal with the Parks Department. And so the first one is the log structures down at the beach. So the Parks Department does actively deal with those structures. it's one of those things where it's really not part of any service that we do. We just do it for safety reasons. We tend to take them down, they get built back up, take them down, built back up. We usually see a lull during the winter months. We don't see a whole lot of structures. We're due to go down and I think there's a fair amount down there right now. So we'll be dismantling those ones. So it's not a regular service that we do, but we do keep an eye on it. And when time permits, we go down there and we do get rid of the structures. There is no, I don't think there's a bylaw or anything in place that we try to encourage people not to do it, especially when the teams are down there dismantling. They do get a lot of negative feedback. You know, it's all in good fun. Why are you taking away our fun? And we just try to educate, inform that it is a safety hazard. And we, as the city, we have to do our due diligence, take these down. But like I say, as we take them down, they just get built back up. And I think we would continue that through the Waterfront Stewardship until so much as there's more infrastructure in place, and maybe we won't have to deal with as much of the log building. The other one was the roadside memorial. So this is another one that I'm working with Sandra, our communications manager, and Byron, Byron Grant, our bylaw manager. It's a very sensitive one. It's challenging to navigate these. We are working on a city policy that speaks to managing roadside memorials. You know, we want to do it in a positive way, so that, you know, we're not, when tragedies happen and families are involved with building these memorials, there's a lot of emotion there. But without a policy to fall back on, it's very hard for us to, you know, go and take these down. So we are working on a policy. High level, the policy will probably put about a 3-month maximum on any kind of roadside, park, boulevard memorial. We would be asking that if someone was going to do that, this is high level as we work through this policy. It's nothing that's official right now. We would put a maximum time limit that these could be erected. We would ask for them to ask the city as they're doing it, so we know that this is up. We could take, we would have contact information for when it needs to be taken down. We would also encourage anybody who's looking to memorialize somewhere specific, that we do have a memorial bench program and a memorial tree program to you know, use that. But, you know, if there was a roadside memorial, we would let it stand for.
Gordon, is that something that could be incorporated into the policy? As opposed to, like, I love the idea of like the memorial bench and tree as a place for people to go and reflect and remember. But when do you anticipate this policy even being in draft phase for review?
Well, I have put it out for internal review right now. So I would think, you know, we want to kind of get it done sooner than later. So it might not get before council before the end of this year, but definitely early next year we should have a policy.
But it will come, yeah.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Okay.
And I have in my first draft, I have included language around the how we would encourage using the city's memorial program, and as well as encourage, you know, registering with the city when you're going to do that. We know that these do happen all the time, as well as we would try to restrict size, and obviously we would have to incorporate you know, offensive language and that sort of thing. So it's a tough thing to navigate, but we are definitely working on it right now. So those are the couple of things that I could speak to while we're waiting for Ian. Hopefully, I was hoping that I could get up here and speak, and then he would show up.
Those are great updates. Thank you for that.
Okay.
Okay, well, I think while we're waiting for Mr. Borhill, we will go into new business. I understand that we have David Ford, Senior Water Resources Engineer, Project Advisor and Backup Project Manager, will be attending via Zoom for any questions that we have today directly for him. He is online. And as far as presenting today for item 5.1 is Ryan, is it Campeau? Campeau, I'm gonna make sure that I'm saying that right. So our parks lead for the Colwood Waterfront Stewardship Plan implementation and project updates. So today is just a briefing, but again, if we do have any questions, we have two very knowledgeable gentlemen to answer those questions. So thank you. I'll let you take the floor.
Thank you. Good afternoon, committee. Thank you for having me here today to introduce the project update on the Colwood Waterfront Stewardship Plan implementation project. Before we go any further, I'd like to acknowledge the change in leadership for this project with the recent creation of my position, the Parks Lead Capital position within the Parks Department. The responsibility for leading this project has transitioned from the Engineering Department to Parks. I should also mention that visuals will be helpful in understanding these design considerations mentioned in the briefing. However, the functional design is not advanced enough at this point to have any visuals to share at this time. However, we'll be sure to provide drawings and illustrations at future updates. I'm pleased to have David Ford, Project Advisor and Backup Project Manager for the CWSP project from Associate Engineering here with us today to answer any technical questions that you may have. Thank you.
Okay, great. So just from my understanding, is David going to walk us through kind of the briefing report, or
I can do that if you like. No, sorry, I did have a presentation prepared, but
oh, that's okay. Yeah. I think that if we could, I know that I personally have a couple of questions, but it would be great if you could go through sort of the briefing report, just the background. If you have a copy of that with you.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that would be great. I think if we could just kind of go through the steps, like the functional design update, and just go through those kind of key challenges, and that might trigger just some questions from this committee. That would be fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you. So right now we're at the functional design phase of the project. So a functional design workshop was held between staff and the design team in June of 2024, and the workshop outputs presented some challenges between the CWSP, the plan itself, and the actual implementation. So a few challenges came up that we discussed. The challenge number one is oceanside grading and drainage. So basically the ponding that occurs in the parking area will be exacerbated by the addition of dune infrastructure along the beachfront there. So we're looking at possible solutions for that, which include perforated pipe drainage systems or infiltration measures. That's going to require some further investigation to see the feasibility of that solution. The next challenge was the beach access points in the CWSP plan. Basically providing all those straight cut throughs through the dune infrastructure kind of defeated the purpose of having the dune infrastructure there. The wave action would just travel straight through those breaks in the dune and provide that overtopping that you're trying to prevent. So some of the solutions they were looking at included angling the paths or just having the paths go up and over the dune at a flatter grade. And the next challenge was the dune location. Basically just looking at saving the amount of volume required to bring onto site by potentially adjusting the location of the dunes from the plan. So yeah, right, as I mentioned, right now we're in the functional design phase. So we'll have a draft design November 20th. So in about a month, we'll have a draft design. And then that phase should be complete March 2025, which leads to the detailed design phase. That goes April 1st, 2025 to July 17th, 2026, leading to tendering and construction. So basically construction is expected to start late 2026 This is all influenced by the permitting phase of the project as well. So there's two different sort of sets of permits we're looking for. So the archaeological permits, the multi-assessment permit that the town of the city is working on, that's expected early next year. And then once the functional design is complete, We'll be submitting for the environmental permitting through the various agencies. That's expected to take between 6 and 18 months for that permitting. Yeah, that's about it. Thank you very much.
No, that's great.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. I definitely have a couple of questions, but I thought I'd maybe look to the, yeah, okay, great, Mr. Kate. Oh, sorry.
I had a few questions on the report, and I have a few questions based on my background as a project management development consultant. So I'm looking at the schedule. I'm looking at the requirements, the permitting, various departments, levels of government that have to input this. I'm also being cognizant with the money that was originally promised. I think the federal contribution to this back, what, 2022, 2021, I'm losing track of time.
Yeah.
But thinking what the value of that's going to be by the time this thing gets going. And I'm looking at the schedule and thinking, is that seen as being relatively optimistic? And if it is, what do you think the reality will bear on this? Are we looking at 2028 in terms of final development? And supplemental to that question is whether things will be sacrificed to keep within some sort of budget guidelines.
Well, regarding the schedule, thank you for the question. Regarding the schedule, there's a much larger Gantt chart that this is all just summarized here, and it does account for the maximum amount of slippage for the permitting process. But it does account for 18 months for environmental and so on, and it does still put the completion within that window of getting the grant money as well. So that just bringing it up basically because that is the highest chance of slippage is the permitting, which is sort of outside our control. And of course that may lead into budgetary concerns as well, because there isn't much extra in the budget for unforeseen. There's contingency as well, but it's early in the project still.
Thank you for that question, and Chris, I'll give you a second here. I just wanted to, I think that I expressed a similar concern just in the sense that, understanding that January 2028 is a project completion deadline, what are the consequences that we face in the event that we cannot meet that deadline? And we're still in that construction phase. Is there like penalties, fines? I think that it would be nice to get a clear understanding of what those consequences are, because there are so many different layers to this design challenge, and just so many different permits that I too sort of looked at this these deadlines and was concerned that, what's going to happen if we don't meet that completion deadline.
Thanks for the question. Typically with these kind of grants, you can request extensions, and further regarding any kind of penalty or anything like that, I'll have to get back to the committee about that. Thank you.
Go ahead, Chris.
Thanks. So I've got a couple of questions. One is about challenge 1, the oceanside grading and drainage. I'm assuming that the reason that the ponding might get worse because of the dunes is because the dunes stop water from both sides, not just the side you want it to. But I'm wondering what's the extent of that issue? And I guess maybe related to that is the dune location. So I'm not clear why moving them inland would reduce material volume. So maybe if you could expand on that a little bit. And how much parking are we talking about might be being impacted by that change?
Thanks for the question. This is a good one for Dave Ford. Thanks.
Thanks, Ryan. Hello again, everybody. We meet again.
Your mic is off, David.
Can you hear me okay there?
We still can't hear you.
Hello? 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 Hello, hello?
Okay, so we still can't hear you. We're just not able to, it's nothing from our end. So I think it's definitely from your end there. Be muted in your room. No, you're not muted on our end. Okay, well, thank you everybody for the patience here. We're just gonna give David a minute to try to log out and then log back in, and hopefully that will work, right? Hi. I see that Ian Borehill's in the room now, so he'll be able to address a couple of our questions that we had earlier, or if you wanted to do it now, would that be appropriate? Okay. So Ian, just so you know, I just sort of touched on the walkabout that I had with some of the committee members and some of the questions that were brought forward that I shared with you. And I just sort of highlighted what those were. Some of those have already been addressed. We did speak about the feeding of the wildlife. And we did speak to the memorial cross and the log huts, but there was still just a couple of things remaining: the large log under the bridge, the lime rock, and the building of groins and the degaussing cables. And then I think the committee was also looking forward to maybe a brief update on where we're at with the biodiversity baseline study. So if you could maybe touch on those points for the committee, would be greatly appreciated. And then David Ford, we will move to you after we hear from Ian Borhill. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and apologies for my delay earlier. Yeah, so I had a chance to connect with one of the members of the committees that you walked with earlier, Member McKay, this morning, and thanks a lot for making the time. And tried to get Glenn out. Sorry we didn't connect, but so learned a little bit more about the questions, and I think we've got some preliminary responses here. So we haven't had feedback from local First Nations about that specific rock. However, we're going to ask the question and investigate. So that's something we're looking into more. The issue of groins. So I touched base with David earlier this morning as well, and Member McKay and myself and Ryan were out at the site and looking at that idea. And what we suggested was that if the committee was interested in exploring the idea of a groin that was intended to protect the bridge, that would be something that could be brought forward as a motion to council in the context of our upcoming service review, and potentially along the lines of recommending to council that staff be directed to investigate that as an initiative in 2025. I'd be proposing that would be a separate body of work from what's now ongoing with the Waterfront Stewardship Plan. However, one that would benefit from an existing analysis that was done in 2008. We call it the Seabolt report, and that we could potentially look at using some of the existing talent we've attained with our contract with Associated Engineering. On the degaussing cables, we talked about that this morning with Member McKay. And that we understand there are a number of these large cables that run along the shoreline. Our feeling now is that the main response would be, one, to make sure that public safety is taken care of. So where the cables are sticking up, that we cut them back and bury them, and then keep an eye on that situation in case further erosion creates an additional safety concern. Anything else I missed?
I think, no, we actually did touch on the feeding of the wildlife. I did mention that Byron Grant did email me right before the meeting, but I was able to thank you, Councillor Grove, for showing me that email. I wouldn't have caught it. But that will be addressed during service review. We'll take a look at that because we don't currently have a bylaw in place that prevents people from feeding birds and other wildlife. I think, you know, I'm wondering if it would be worthwhile to maybe, you know, recommend that we have a workshop with this committee down at, and maybe take the opportunity to do a tour of the lagoon as a group. I'm just wondering what your thoughts on that would be. I feel like it might be beneficial. We haven't really had many opportunities to get together and engage as a committee. And I think that it would make sense to me if we, could try to coordinate. I know how difficult it can be to coordinate groups of people with different lifestyles and schedules, but I think it would be a nice idea to perhaps look at exploring a workshop and a group tour down at the waterfront.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, that's something we've talked about in the internal staff discussions. Potentially, it'd be something that'd be very fruitful once the functional designs were brought forward, and the committee could walk the beach with the plans and members of the project team to have a workshop around some of the issues at play that are influencing the design of the Waterfront Stewardship Plan. And that'd be a really meaningful way to educate the committee on what's happening. We've held 2 such workshops in the past at the beach, and we'd be happy to host an additional one.
Okay, I think that would be great. I'm gonna, Sarah Gibbons has a question here. Before I do that, do I get a sense just with hands that this committee would be interested in engaging in a workshop such as that? Yeah, okay. Perhaps we could you could take that as direction to, send out an email. Maybe we could start seeking some dates for
Sure.
When it would be appropriate, like when the timing would be appropriate for something like that. I'm gonna let Ms. Gibbons ask her question.
Hi, Ian. Thanks for those updates. I just had some questions regarding the feeding of the wildlife. So I understand the city doesn't have a bylaw. However, if it's a particular individual that is known for doing this repetitively, it's a sanctuary. Like, can this not go to a CRD or MOE? Like, how does that work? And have we looked into that approach until we get a bylaw in place?
Thank you for that question through the chair. Yes, I spoke with Mr. Grant, our manager of bylaw services, and he had been in contact with, as has already been discussed, a member of the federal enforcement team down there. So there currently isn't legislation that we would be able to enforce either at the municipal or federal level at the Magdalene Sanctuary to prevent feeding. However, as has been stated, there's an interest to include this with our animal attractant work that councils have directed us to undertake. Hoping to tie that in at the service fee discussion. We're also proposing within the draft Waterfront Stewardship Plan that we take another look at our global animal control policies at the waterfront, including this issue. So this is one that I'd certainly advocate as being one that we should expedite. We're having issues with geese down there. The feeding of birds is leading to the concentration of species that will also be problematic for eating the plantings that we're going to be putting down there. So I think it's an issue that we should jump on.
And if I can, Ms. Gibbons, this is definitely something that is on my radar, as well as Councillor Jansen, who's not here, obviously, but this is something that him and I have discussed in great lengths, that we do need to make some improvements to our animal control bylaw. So yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. I'm going to let Mr. Cates. Oh, you want to push it?
Thanks. I guess it goes back to the previous speaker, or speakers, as well as yourself, Ian, in terms of signage. I know I've raised it before. I think there's some agreement and disagreement over signage, but the signage is really lacking there. And we're not just talking about the feeding of the birds, and we're also talking about people letting their dogs run wild in an area where they're supposed to be leashed, which of course affects the birds, as we know. There's also issues related to, putting up the memorials, and there's been several, and I know some of my local neighbors have taken down a couple memorials in front of our place that shouldn't have been there. There's also issues related to to people having these massive picnics on the dunes itself, which is breaking the dunes down. So there's all sorts of things. There's about 4, 5, 6 issues that I think should be addressed with signs. Now, signs do have a role. Sometimes they're not a panacea, but it also gives local residents the ability to say, look, this is something I'm pointing you to. Because there've been a lot of people I've told, get your dog on a leash. If you want to put it off leash, go beyond the washrooms where it's off leash. But in this area, keep them on the leash, and there is, signage, but it's few and far between. So I think a concerted effort for some decent signage would go a long way. Whether there's a bylaw in place or not, it's just really logic. So they shouldn't be feeding the birds. And I think we're up to about 3 people. There's 3 vans that show up that do regular feeding, and they're feeding. In fact, we stopped one of them feeding the geese stuff that frankly would have killed the geese on the spot. So there's a lot of that going on. So I just want to raise that again, because I think it's a really critical issue.
Yeah, thank you for that. And again, it absolutely is on my radar. So, but I do appreciate, I agree with you completely. So we're certainly going to look at addressing some of these concerns at council.
Madam Chair, if I could, so there is substantial thought given to that issue of signage in the Waterfront Stewardship Plan. It's seen as a critical component of the overall approach, as you've stated. We are looking at ways in which we can integrate education, physical barriers, plantings, signage to have that integrated approach to the management of the space. So very much, as you stated, it's something that we want to do a good job of. And I know the project team and our Parks Department are very much alive to. So.
Great, thank you for that, Ian. Does anybody have any other questions for Ian? And if not, I am going to reintroduce David Ford.
Oh, I almost the biodiversity strategy. Sorry about that. I can give a quick update on it. So we've concluded our request for proposals process to select a consultant. There's been 4 proponents have made submissions, and we're hoping to have a successful proponent announced next week or the week thereafter. The hope is that once the consultant has been engaged with the city, we bring them to the committee and we provide an update at the outset of the project.
Great. Thank you, Ian. So David, do we have your microphone working?
Does this work?
That's great. That is great. Thank you and welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Great to see some familiar faces there in the room. So just going back to the previous question that was asked with regard to the oceanside grading and drainage. So there's you nailed it in one there. Basically by making the dunes higher and restoring the dunes, you're essentially introducing a barrier with regard to runoff that falls on the road, ponds adjacent to the road, and in usual circumstances would be able to infiltrate a little bit better into the underlying peninsula and or run off the road through the existing kind of riffles and access points along the dune complex and the beach and run off onto the upper beach. So it'll be a particular challenge with respect to storm events. And we're doing our best, obviously, to limit wave overtopping by increasing the dune crest elevations. And that'll be limiting wave overtopping to tens of liters per second per meter. So it is an improvement on the existing scenario. But what happens to that water that gets trapped behind the dune? Coupled with that, then obviously we're getting more severe and inclement weather. Unfortunately, as everybody saw last weekend, with the effects of climate change, we're going to have potentially more atmospheric rivers, more pronounced regular storm events. So that will be falling on the road more regularly as well going forward. So that's something that we're dealing with in our functional design right now. I've actually been reviewing that drawing package for the last couple of days amongst our team. So some of the things that we're investigating at the moment is putting in a more of a defined stormwater management system behind the dune, collecting that water and routing it through the beach access paths that will be going through the dune complex. I can elaborate on that a little bit more if you would like.
Sure, please do.
Yeah, so it was interesting. Members of the design team were part of a kind of a coastal practitioners community here in BC and portions of the US. It's through Coastal Zone Canada. We were at a workshop a couple of weeks ago, and there was another consulting firm from the States that were presenting on a very kind of analogous project that they had down in the San Diego area. Cardiff Beach is the name in San Diego, but they were doing exactly what we're aiming to do with this project with regard to dune restoration, implementation of nature-based solutions, improving habitat whilst not compromising on the social element of Cobourg Peninsula, or in this case, their beach area. They had beach access points as well through their dune system. And after construction, they found that in kind of the ensuing storm events that would happen in the next couple of years, they were getting sinkholes and a lot of attack from overland stormwater flow from the road behind the dune system. So basically, it was rolling down the road into the beach access paths and exploiting voids where material might not have been properly compacted during construction. And kind of a double-edged sword as well would be that it was vulnerable to wave action from the ocean side. So waves were attacking those access areas, able to run up on those path locations and basically dig and scour at those vulnerable sites. So there's a couple of things that we're exploring and adding to the functional design, and everything at this stage is kind of on the table, and welcome feedback from members of city staff and presumably the committee going forward. But originally the CWSP would have had at grade access paths, so essentially cut throughs through the dune system. We would be now proposing to go up and over the dune so that the dune itself stays intact as much as possible. So we would still try and allow for disability access as an example by making that up and over route long, so that the ramp or the slope up over the dune satisfies typical slope requirements for wheelchair users, etc. Another kind of option or action that we're taking is orientating those access paths away from the predominant wave direction. So the direction of attack from waves, which is a southeasterly direction predominantly at Colwood. So we're orientating them away from that direction to make sure that they're not getting the brunt of that wave attack. There is a compromise there that we'll be looking to the city to kind of guide us on. There would be a compromise on the visual access to the beach and the ocean from people in cars on Ocean Boulevard and Cobourg looking to their right as they drive towards Fort Rod Hill, because you won't have those defined beach cut-throughs as often as the original kind of function or the original concept would have had it. And coupled with that, we'll be looking at potentially designing swales behind the dune system to capture that overland flow routes and route them through the dunes or through the access paths to discharge on the upper beach. So that's just kind of giving a flavor of the things that we're batting around amongst the team.
Well, that's great. Thank you for that information, David. I can appreciate there's a lot of layers to this, and it's definitely outside of my expertise. I did have a couple of questions, but I'm gonna let Mr. McKay here. It looks like he's got a question for you.
Yes, David. Is there any thought of repurposing some of the large logs that we've had on the beach and pin them or stake them into the ground so they don't move to act as a barrier along with the dunes? Heaven helps, we've got enough logs down there to do something in the large logs. Just a thought.
Absolutely, yeah. That was kind of one of the first things that was flagged by city staff when we were kicking off the project. We'll try and harness as much of that usable material as possible for habitat complexing. And obviously that large woody debris can also serve as a function to dampen wave energy as it rolls up the beach. So we would be using that for things like protecting end return points where a dune system kind of transforms into a beach access path. So we will try and harness that material as much as possible in the design.
Did you have a question, Neve? Okay. Do you want to push your button again? Oh, it's weird. The mics are acting a little bit weird.
It's not going green.
Oh,
It just goes straight to red.
So it's my mic is acting up because it's me. It's a user error.
So you're
There you go. Please go ahead.
Hey, David, I guess my question is about the access paths, and this will probably be answered once we get to have a look at the design when it's finished. But I'm just wondering what the plan looks like to when those access paths are put in, whether they're going through the dunes or up over top. How do you plan to how does the design plan to keep people then off the dunes, or is that a consideration just because we're going to, I assume, be replanting them up top, and like how do we keep that people off them to protect them?
So we haven't answered that question yet, but that is definitely one of the big questions that's still on our plate to answer. That's definitely a landscaping and environmental design consideration. We've talked about things like split rail fencing, things, obviously a lot of signage, utilizing that large woody debris that we were just talking about. Yeah, we will definitely dissuade and discourage people from traipsing through beautifully planted, freshly planted vegetation that will be planted as part of the dune restoration. That's something that we will be pursuing as part of kind of detailed design.
Okay, and then just one really quick follow-up question. Is the plan to have the access paths as sand material, or do you see it being some other kind of fill, just in terms of how that looks from an erosion standpoint over time with people utilizing the path?
It would be a gravel material, and that is probably something that we'll need to double check again with the landscaping peoples in terms of what's best as a user experience, particularly for people with disabilities and people that would let's say struggle getting up and over that particular rise. That's another question that we will be answering in the next few weeks as part of just firming up the functional design. And also it'll be a cost thing. So we'll be doing a detailed cost estimate kind of at every gate within this project at the different design stages. And that's something that we will be flagging with city staff. It could be an item that might have to be compromised on depending on the scale of the project. So yeah, no definitive answer yet. Everything's kind of on the table.
Gotcha. Thank you.
If I can just jump in for a second, maybe you can answer it, Ian. Each phase of the project schedule, so phase 2 functional design, phase 3 detailed design, are each one of these phases going to come forward to council? Like, are we going to get a chance to review the functional design, and then like, are we going to see those and it will be brought forward to discuss things like accessibility and whatnot?
Thank you, Madam Chair, for that question. So this might be a question where I start, and maybe Ryan has, if you have anything to add, to jump in. But so as laid out in the draft waterfront stewardship plan, this committee would be the steering committee for the project. So the project team would be using the waterfront stewardship committee as a body that helps navigate some of these issues and questions. We're hoping that the first council meeting in November, we'll be able to bring forward that plan and have that affirmed through finalization of the waterfront stewardship plan, such that the committee could play that role. I would leave it up to, I would defer to Ryan and his team as to how that actually roll out, but that is the intention of the plan.
That's great. Also, just in follow-up, I'm happy to see that the committee and First Nations engagement sessions have dates attached to them. Are those have those been set with First Nations? Like those dates, are they set? Because I feel like it's such a sensitive project timeline that I'm just wondering if they've been consulted on these dates and they're aware of them.
Ryan's shaking his head, so I don't believe that we've got specific confirmation of those dates. I should note that as members of the committee may know, there was a successful agreement on a relationship agreement between the city and the Songhees Nation. That was a signing ceremony that happened a couple of weeks ago. Part of that relationship agreement sees us joining in a working group. Our hope is that some of the issues that are germane to the waterfront stewardship plan implementation could be tackled by that working group. It would provide for a hopefully a more efficient way to address these things with the Songhees Nation. We did receive feedback from their archaeological team on their waterfront stewardship plan a little while ago, and that'll be part of staff's reporting back to council in November. With respect to the other nations, I believe we'll be trying our best to accommodate their schedules, and hopefully we'll either attain those dates or close to them. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you. Mr. McKay.
Just a point of clarification with the dunes. The dunes are a feral environment, and I don't know how far we want to restore or keep replenishing or whatever we're going to do, because prior to the gravel pit operations, this was entirely a cobblestone beach with very few logs for refuge. As we see it now, you got logs and you got sand and you got things that are trying to promote growth. But I guess the point of question is never was part of the lagoon in the beginning. It's only from 1909 on forward that we enjoyed a sandy beach all the way down to the bridge. It never was. It was a cobblestone beach, period, with very, if any, logs that we see now. So it's just a point of discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, I was just going to say, does anybody have any more questions, Mr. Willing?
Yes, thanks. David, do you have an estimate of how much of compatible material for dunes you are going to require for this project?
We don't have an exact volume to hand, unfortunately, but we will have a rough estimate of that once we finalize our drawings. As I said, I have the drawings on screen here. There's been some modeling done and some profiles created. We'll have a rough indication, but it'll also be heavily dependent on if the city are happy with the alignment with respect to where we're putting dunes, where we're putting access paths. There's the Woo North section as well, which is kind of this living or shared pathway. That's the bottom end of Millburn. So kind of the section between Royal Beach and the lift station, where the road is made to essentially snake, which acts as a traffic calming measure. It'll be a shared roadway with pedestrians. That will have a material requirement as the road moves further onto the beach and recedes back towards the toe of the slope. So we'll have a rough order of magnitude, I'd say, in the next few weeks, and obviously finessing that as we progress through detailed design.
So it could be possibly 50,000 meters or 100,000 meters?
I won't even take a stab at that. Not yet,
And-
unfortunately. The next meeting, we might be able to give you a number.
And your availability of this material would be from where? Supply?
That's something we're investigating as part of functional design as well. Yeah.
Yeah, the problem is now that there's no more dredge sand coming out of the Fraser River. So there are not a lot of places you can get it within say 200 kilometers.
Yeah. Yeah.
The other comment I have, and I think I wish we could all just get on a bus tomorrow and go up to Courtney and see what has been done and what has been done right. And the comment about the logs on the beach of putting them in, they've done that there. I've walked that, and it's very effective. And what they've done is they found the good beach logs that are salvageable. They put them on end and they dug them into the beach with the backhoes. Then they've made the trails down to the beach through the area that are, quote, the dunes, and they overlap the logs so that the impact from the swells from the southeast don't get into and start sucking the material out from the backside of the barrier of the logs. So there's a lot to be learned from the Puntledge River. I think it's a place everybody should go and spend a couple of days and just see what they've done, not only on that side, but also the restoration of the grasses inside up towards the bridge. And the rest of it is, it's a fantastic job. And why we're looking for the Swiss watch when there's already one up the street, I would certainly put my money on and take a day and go up there and just see what they have done with what they have. I know they have a lot of federal money. That's the one thing you do need is lots of money. And of course, with the air base there, it has helped.
Yeah, just to elaborate on that point. So I know that we're in communications with the Stewardship Centre of BC on this project, who administered the Green Shores program, which is essentially the certification process for nature-based coastal solutions projects locally. So they'll be keeping us honest with regard to the implementation of nature-based coastal solutions. So using that natural material to prevent wave attack and to essentially soften the landscape instead of us using, our traditional curved seawalls and our large amounts of riprap. They'll be keeping us honest on that. And also the coastal engineer that's on this particular project, Jessica from DHI, is their global lead for nature-based coastal solutions. And yeah, there's a lot of people on this project that are working on those types of projects locally. So we'll be able to leverage local knowledge on this one too.
Thank you, David. Neve, before I let you go, Ian, were you going to speak to that? So maybe I'll let you speak to that and then I'll move to you, Neve.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And to Member Willing's point, I believe it was your suggestion, Ms. Willing, a couple of years ago that prompted the members of the project team to actually go down and visit that site. So it was Goose Spit primarily that we looked at. I believe that's probably what you're talking about out there at Comox. Paul DeGrief, our lead consultant on the development of the plan, is very familiar with that site and has attended it a couple times. And I also went and visited and took some pictures, and I can share that with the project team as well again. So thank you.
Thank you. And I'm going to let Neve speak. Oh, I don't need to let you speak. You just
I'm
go.
using this as if it's a green light. I'm just you kind of answered one of my questions. I was going to ask if you had Green Shores engaged for this, but I was also wondering if by the time the functional design is finished, I would assume your environmental team will probably have some form of draft together for an impact assessment or whatever supplementary docs they'll be using for the Fisheries Act authorization. And I was wondering if it was possible if we would be able to have a look at that. I have the same concerns as Rick from a historical fish habitat perspective of how I mean it can be done because I work on projects where we do it, but just it's harder to monitor something and keep it there and work properly over time. That's maybe not the natural habitat there, such as the dune. So I would just like to see the discussion behind that. And yeah, I would just like to see the environmental study if possible.
Mr. Borhill. That's a
Thank
good
you, Madam Chair.
segue.
So, thank you. So, in the initial stages of the development of the Waterfront Stewardship Plan was a coastline assessment that included an environmental assessment. The forage fish issue and the habitat for forage fish was a big part of that. And so there was a tabletop exercise that looked at the results of research that's been undertaken primarily by the Peninsula Stream Keepers Group and other local groups. Part of the intention of the plan is to enhance the habitat for those species that depend on the right type of substrate to be there in the foreshore area. We're likely in early days for the project team to comment on details with that regard, but it suffices to say it is a big part of our thinking there.
Okay, thank you for that. Thank you to Ian and Gord and Ryan and David. Does anybody else have any questions before we, Mr. Cates?
I mean, I don't know if this is the right time or place to raise this. I'm going back to budgets. It's a project manager in me. So I'm talking about budgets. I'm wondering how the budgets are going to be influenced, or how the project will be influenced by the available funds. I'm thinking in terms of the commitment that was made earlier. If we're looking at I know there's going to be a lot of expenditures. There's a lot of consulting fees on this whole thing over the term, design fees. But I'm specifically thinking about monies that's been committed, notionally at least, to this project. If it doesn't start until 2028, if we could get some idea what that translates into in terms of current dollars.
Thanks for that question. So the design team's proposal for this entire project is based on upside fees in today's dollars. I don't believe there's an allowance for inflation excuse me, in their proposal. But I'd have to get back to you on further details about that as well. Thank you.
Okay. Well, that brings us to the adjournment of the meeting today. Oh, you just snuck that one in there. Okay. Well, I haven't approved it yet.
I think we're going to talk about groins today.
I think
We're
we
going to talk
did.
about logs today.
We
Talking
did.
about trails today.
We're not talking about trails today, no, but we did touch on groins. Actually, Ian did speak to it briefly, I think, unless I'm completely mistaken.
Certainly, and Madam Chair, if the committee has some more questions or would like to discuss that issue, as I mentioned, it is a component of our previous work that we looked at in terms of different coastal protection measures that could be deployed. Groins aren't currently envisioned as part of the body of work that we're implementing now through the $6 million grant that we received. However, as I said, if the committee was interested in discussing the addition of the exploration of that type of structure, staff would be happy to advance that if it was council's wishes to endorse a recommendation from this committee.
So that would, I think you mentioned, Ian, before you sit down, that was definitely additional work outside of what is already being planned for the multi-use pathway and that, right? So this would be potentially exploring additional work at additional cost. And so that would be something that would have to, if that's something that the committee desired, would have to come forward as a motion, a recommendation to council, and then council would have to review that. So I suppose I'm asking if that is something that.
Could I elaborate?
Pardon me?
Could I elaborate?
Please do. Yeah.
If I could elaborate on that, with just what Ian said, and we talked about that this morning, it would not be a part of this project. It's extraneous to this project, but it is an issue. And we talked about it maybe in the next fiscal year as a project or whatever, but it has to be approved to this committee. Where we're going with this is it's called the protection of the bridge. We had the bridge shut down earlier in the spring, didn't we? In the spring, where we had waves coming through. It is a very serious situation. 2010, we haven't seen anything quite like 2010, where the bridge abutments were starting to get washed away and they had to shut the bridge down. It was a combination of a king tide and storm surge. And you had to see the waves come across where the old pub used to be, and it just came rolling right through, hitting those bridge abutments. These big logs coming through, just hammering the pilings. And where the middens are, the waves are going up and literally just clawing out. You can see where they just clawed the material, the aggregate, right off the shore. This never existed when the gravel pit was in operation. As soon as the gravel pit operations of dumping sand in the mid-70s, that was it. There was nothing for replenishment. And what we saw up until about literally 15, 20, well, about 20 years ago, it was exactly what it was before. It was this long, like a natural barrier that prevented those waves from coming through. So much so, you see in that presentation I gave, and some of you got pictures of the 1930s, where there was houses all the way out as far as, well, on this side, of course, where the searchlight station was. That's how high it was. And that prevented any kind of damage to the bridge and or the embankment. But as it stands right now, it's in a vulnerable state. And so a groin or any kind of natural barrier created, I would think I would strongly suggest it. And so that's the rationale behind it.
So I'm going to jump in for a second. Strong suggestion and making a recommendation. I guess the question is, does this committee have a desire to bring forward a recommendation to council to explore the addition of adding groins to protect the bridge as part of the development construction of the multi-use pathway? And if that is the case, then that does need to come forward as a recommendation from this committee.
Yeah, Madam Chair, if I could add a little bit. So we would advocate the committee looking at this as a separate body of work from what has been brought very much forward to implementation stage with the Waterfront Stewardship Plan. As I mentioned, groins as a intervention in the coastal zone was something that we looked at several years ago. For various reasons, it was decided not to put forward in the current plan as it stands. However, if the committee wanted to recommend to council that this is something they were interested in, for example, a pre-feasibility study, that could be work that if we got direction from council at the next council meeting, there would be sufficient time for us to bring costing and options for the council at the service review for 25. So if that is something the committee is interested in, we could certainly act on that in time for the service review.
Okay, I'm curious to know, is it something that we could potentially, there was mention of a workshop as well, so potentially looking at a workshop, is that something that could be incorporated into a workshop to provide, because you've got some history and some information, because this was explored in 2008, could that be brought forward at a workshop to gain a better understanding of what work has been done in the past prior to making a recommendation, if that makes sense?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, so we did have a workshop with the committee previously that went over some of the past work on groins. I would suggest that we do keep it as a separate item from the workshop that we were discussing previously,
Okay.
focusing on the functional designs of the current plan. I think we would probably want to look at it as a separate body of work. And if the committee was interested, we would tackle it in a separate workshop. Really what I'm thinking is if it's the desire of this committee to make the recommendation to council, we would suggest that like a pre-feasibility study be what is proposed. That is something that we could get costing on in the near term, and then provide, as I said, options flowing from that relative to the next steps for determining whether a groin to protect the bridge is a good idea.
Okay, so it would be a pre-feasibility study to explore the use of groins to protect the bridge is essentially what we're looking at here. Okay, so if you'd like to make a recommendation, if this committee wants to support that, then we could certainly do that today. Mr. McKay, that would you like to do?
Make a recommendation, please. Make a recommendation.
Okay, so, okay, well then so I guess the recommendation would be for staff to perform a pre-feasibility study as a separate body of work. Does that need to be referenced in there, or just a pre-feasibility study to explore the use of using groins to protect the bridge? Would that language be appropriate?
Certainly, and then maybe perhaps in 2025, just to clarify.
In 2025. Do you have that, Corinne? Okay. Okay. You need to hit your button. Okay.
Would support that, but I would strongly suggest that it's be started in 2024 to observe the conditions and have a select few people from committee or whatever to monitor that. That's standard procedure. When we built our dock, I spent 2 years doing weather surveys, and prior to the installation of that dock and the elevations and everything else, that should be studied now, just monitored through the winter or whatever else, and then bring it back, because that gives you an idea of the potential, and you can look at wave heights, you can measure wave heights and whatever. But do I think there's a very inexpensive way of fixing that in the interim? I wouldn't say this is looking at a permanent solution, but I would say as an interim solution. We spent all this money bringing that bridge back up to really good standard, and we don't want to lose that bridge. You lose your bridge, you lose a lot of your project. And I'll tell you right now, with the way the traffic was the last 3 days that they shut down, you're going to have just an absolute nightmare if that bridge goes down for, say, 6 months or a year. I don't know where you're going to put the traffic, Ian. There's just no way.
So if I can jump in here, Ian, maybe is looking at it in 2025, is it based on staff capacity right now as we're going into service review and budgeting? Is there a benefit to looking at it sooner, or if you can give me just some guidance there?
Certainly, and thank you for the question. Yeah, as I said, it's been an issue that we've looked at in the past. So there is work that could be done in terms of bringing forward that previous work. What I'm thinking of is that we, as an initial step, staff would be working with the consulting community to get an understanding of what the scope would entail for a feasibility study, and then the cost of that study.
Mm-hmm.
And then we could bring that forward to the service review process that's scheduled to happen next month. Certainly, some of the work that Mr. Willing is advocating is done as a matter of course through our management of the waterfront.
Okay.
The previous studies looking at different interventions on the shoreline are using models that we currently have data for and we own. So it would be a matter of looking at the work involved and the cost as an initial step. This is essentially what I'm proposing.
Okay. Corinne, can you bring up the recommendation? Okay, so just the recommendation that's on the floor right now is that the Waterfront Stewardship Committee recommend to council that staff perform a pre-feasibility study in 2025 to explore the use of using groins to protect the bridge. Does that language satisfy you, Mr. Rick McKay?
What do you think, Glenn? What more should we put in there? I mean, it's that's what it is, the pre-feasibility, but I think as Glenn and I has said and alluded to as well, we don't want to wait forever. 2010, that was a Jim Dandy, I tell you. And the bridge was closed down in the spring when it came roaring across that open area. See, that comes back to the old pub where those rocks are. Those rocks were put in there by the combination, I think, of the D&D and I think Jody Twan, wasn't it, or just D&D?
Or not?
D&D, okay, D&D put it out there. Why did they put it there? Is because the natural barrier that was there for years was gone. So, and effectively, that barrier acted like a natural groin. So that's circulated and deposits sand. I used to live in that place many years ago, and it was sand all the way out because you had that natural barrier going all the way out. Once that was gone, that southeast wind with a storm surge came roaring across it and just took it all out, which then started wearing away where the pub was. So that necessitated the D&D to start dumping all these riprap to stop it from eroding further. And that comes into the limestone. Rocks were never a part of that environment back then, none. Where it came from, maybe it was part of the riprap. I don't know. But anyway, back to this. If we could even get it going sooner, that would even be better somehow, but not part of this project what we're currently talking about. I think this is of importance, I tell you.
Okay. Chris Ling has a question here. So are you done?
Yep.
Okay. Sorry, I didn't mean to come across rude. Mr. Ling.
Thanks. I'm just curious as to what extent in existing work that's already been done, risks to the bridge are already considered, like in the modeling that was done for the waterfront plan, and you've alluded to other studies that were done in the past. Like, I would assume one of the questions in that was any risks to existing infrastructure, including the bridge. So have we already answered this question somewhere as to whether something is needed at all?
Thank you for that question through the chair. Excuse me. Yes and no. Hate to start that way, but going back, as I mentioned, as far back as 2008, the bridge really was the focus of the work of the city and trying to figure out what's happening there with erosion and the threats to the shoreline. We call it the Sea Bulk Report. That was the company that prepared it, and it looked at 6 different interventions, including groins that could be deployed to limit erosion. At that time, in 2008, the report looked at a scenario where we have a series of groins along the waterfront. They had conceptual costing at that time of around 4.8 million to build those groins. I believe, as it's been articulated today, it would be a smaller project than what was envisioned at that time, focusing around the north end of the peninsula at the bridge. We haven't specifically looked at that as an intervention relative to the modeling that's been undertaken. The modeling that Mr. Ford could speak to in much better detail than I is really looking at the coastal inundation and flooding that we're trying to mitigate. As we understand it and whatever our consultants have told us, it's quite difficult to model coastal landforms like the north end of the spit because of the different complex flows of water and wave energy. So we haven't necessarily looked at the efficacy of a groin in the same detail we have in the other aspects of the waterfront planning.
Thank you, Ian. Okay, so maybe we'll bring that recommendation back up here. And I think just for this, I just need a mover for this recommendation. Rick McKay. I don't think I need a seconder on this. Is there any discussion? Any further discussion? No further discussion. Is there anybody opposed to this recommendation? If you're opposed, please state that if you're opposed. Okay. Okay, it's kind of a bit weird right now, but I will go for it.
I think it's just a little bit open-ended right now. I think maybe define the pre-feasibility. I mean, my God, there's been so many feasibility studies and studies with this whole thing, period. Just don't want to see something.
Well, I do.
Chasing its tail.
Yeah, and I do feel like some of the work that's been done in the past is probably going to be incorporated in some of this information that's going to come forward. So, and I might just be making an assumption here, but because there has been some past work done, that will be incorporated in some of this information that would come forward, correct?
Yes, Madam Chair. I think if council's wishes were to endorse this recommendation, staff's next act would be to detail out a potential project at our service review process, which is scheduled for, I believe,
Very soon.
November 4th. Yeah.
Yeah, very soon. Okay, I'm gonna jump to Chris Ling. I'm gonna give him a minute, and then I'm gonna give you a minute, and then we're going to carry on with this recommendation.
Yeah, I think I'm in a position where I'm not sure I can really go along with this recommendation, because I think it's presupposing too many things at this stage, and I'm not clear yet if there is a genuine concern about the bridge, and I'm also not clear if there was, a groin would necessarily be the right tool to utilize to protect the bridge. So I think it's leaping over a couple of sort of steps first. It may be that there is an issue that needs addressing with the bridge. I don't know. So I that's one thing. And if a groin would be the best solution for that, I think is also an unknown at this stage. So I just think I would be uncomfortable. I mean, I'd be comfortable supporting something like, investigating if there is an issue needs to be addressed with the bridge. But, I think and maybe that's easy to answer. I just don't have that information in front of me.
I'm going to let Ian speak here.
Madam Chair, through the chair, that's a great question. The short answer is no. It's actually a very difficult process to determine whether a groin would be a good idea. This is based on my understanding from our coastal engineering consultants that really see this as a very tricky issue in terms of what the addition of a groin would do to the coastal process here. I know there's a lot of knowledge and understanding of how things have worked there on the committee. But specifically, we're looking at coastal engineering work in the, in terms of the design and the determination of the efficacy of the intervention being in, more than $100,000 type of budget.
Okay, Rick, this will be, I think, your third time. So I'm going to.
Okay, whether it's a groin, breakwater, whatever you want to call it, it is an issue. And believe me, I have read every engineering report since Colwood as being a municipality. And it's been a series of navel gazing. All we do is report after report after report after report after report, and nothing's done. I have to say, well, what we're doing in the next couple of years is the most positive and affirmative step that we have taken. I can look at all the reports and recommendations and nothing's been done. The best one that I've ever read, combined with what we're doing right now, was a Seabolt report that Ian has recommended. And there were 6 options, and one was the groin, or whatever you want to call it. And it's part of it is to repair the bridge embankment at the north end, and or protecting the bridge itself with the pilings.
Okay, final, Mr. Cates, you had your mic on.
Well, I just want to add to this whole discussion, because it's not all that straightforward, but my experience with groins have not been overly productive. There was one experience I had in Manitoba with our inland ocean, Lake Winnipeg, where we put groins in to protect a bridge that was part of the municipal development plan. And it just led to a requirement for serious dredging, and it just changed things too much. So, I mean, this may be more than just a quick and dirty study. I don't know. There's going to be some serious modeling with this, very serious modeling. And it's getting more difficult because we can't anticipate what the increases due to climate change are going to result in and how they might affect it. It's just a bad location for a bridge.
Okay, I'm gonna let Neve speak, and then we're gonna call the question on this recommendation. Please go ahead.
I just wonder if it, so I agree. It seems like we're almost like jumping the gun a little bit. If it would be better to do an options assessment or something. I know, so I'm an environmental consultant, so I have a project right now that we are having considerable issues with permitting, and it's groins. DFO are not fans of them, and I just think if we are going to look into options of placing stuff into the foreshore there, that the environment should be considered just from a permitting perspective, because we have had guidance on that particular project from DFO of what they would like to see instead of groins on that particular design. But I just think if we are putting a recommendation forward and we are going to spend money on this, that we want to put our best foot forward of trying to look at everything at the same time, so that at least we know what we're looking at going forward. Because I think we're quite a ways out on anything actually happening.
Thank you, Neve. I'm struggling with this one. Ian, is it possible for us to be able to, as a committee, I mean, it all requires staff time to some degree, which we do need approval from council on, but I'm wondering if maybe another approach might be that that this committee can be briefed on some of the results from the work that's been done in the past, and so that we can see, okay, what time has already gone into this study, and provide us with that information so that we can say, okay, well, this has already been done and this has already been done, but maybe we're missing something here, and then we come forward with something like this if it's necessary. I'm just trying to play the devil's advocate here, that maybe we need to be briefed on some of the information that has been already, like the work that has already been done that we are not aware of. We have not seen those reports. So I'm getting some head nods, but I'm wondering if maybe that would be an approach that we could take as a first step. Because I personally haven't seen any reports on any past studies on groins that have been done by this city. So I'm wondering if that could be, if this committee would be happy with that recommendation, because it will require some staff time to put together a briefing report. Can you just give me your insight on that?
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'm thinking it was back, some of the members of the committee that were on the previous Waterfront Coastal Processes Committee could probably help me with the timing here, but I believe it was 2022, where we held 2 separate what we call technical charrettes that were workshops where we had our coastal engineers go through all of the previous studies. What we could do is do that again with a focus on the issue of groins. What I'd recommend is that that staff also involve some of the coastal engineering team that we're currently engaged with the Waterfront Stewardship Plan. It was Mr. Ford who actually led that previous exercise. So if the committee was interested in having a similar exercise undertaken specifically for the issue of groins, I would recommend that we could take that approach quite easily. In terms of timing and our capacity, it would likely be something that happens towards the end of this quarter this year or early next in 2025. And it would be helpful for staff if that recommendation was something that went through and was endorsed by council.
Okay. Okay. I'm going to.
Am I timed out or am I okay?
Well, I think we've all, most
for
of
my
us are all.
last time. My comment, Madam Chair, is that it's nice to come here every 5 months. I wouldn't mind if it was every 2 months, because I think we're getting behind things that are going on, and there's things that have not been discussed that should have been discussed with this group a long time ago, which includes shore walks and things like that, so people get an understanding. Reading some reports that have come out of all the years that we've put into this. Some of us have put into this thing to come and volunteer and do this. Anybody that says groins don't work should have spent 3 weeks with me doing the Ross Bay Cemetery groins. If that had not been done, and that was one of the finest engineering projects I've ever worked on, run by a female genius engineer to this day, brilliant woman. And that, if we had not done that project in that year, I guarantee you that Ross Bay Road, Ross Bay and the cemetery would have been in the chuck. We put 90,000 meters of aggregate in between the groins, and that preserved that whole wall forever. Now, anybody that can tell me that it's any different can come and talk with the chief engineer from the city of Victoria, and I know him now. I know him well. We had a long discussion about this, and it worked, and it worked well. What most people do not realize is what happened down when the bridge went out here originally, and that's historical stuff that should be brought forward, is that Dave Saunders, there's a mayor, he took his own excavator down there and did that work to fix the bridge up in the backside. Unbeknownst to most people, if you walk down the end of the fence where the D&D pub used to sit, if you look very closely where that famous white rock is, if you look very closely there, you'll see about 30 to 40 meters of riprap that is at floor level that extends into there. That didn't get put there by God. That got put there by Dave Saunders. And it was the best thing he did, because what he did, but by just putting that bottom layer in, was at the start of a little breakwater. He has protected that sand that sits in behind those rocks from being taken out, and the bridge would be obliterated. The next southeasterly storm, come down there and I'll buy you a ticket. If those rocks were gone, it would be the end of the bridge and you could kiss it goodbye. And there's about a $5 million job just to start on things. So groins are important, but I still say that this study is a study that needs to be done, and it doesn't cost you money to do a study, to go down there and take a reading and the days, take the pictures of the days, and the events and the tides and just record it. That doesn't cost $1 million. It didn't cost me $1 million for 2 years when I spent 15 minutes one day every day doing it. So I mean, let's get with the program here. If I had taken this long to do any projects we had done at work, we would have been bankrupt years and years ago. It's craziness. To me, it's craziness. We need to do some little thing here that does something to get to. I don't want a total fix. I just don't want to see the bridge go out.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll be really quick here. I support your suggestion, Glenn, of meeting more frequently, if that is a possibility, with the committee. And so we can have further discussions about this. I think that we're past the scope of this meeting to discuss it further today. I think we should maybe all go home and do a little bit of research and get a bigger idea of what we need to kind of discuss for our next meeting, and then readdress it and have a more structured kind of discussion. I think it's an important discussion. I just think it's, you know, I'm not knowledgeable on it enough, to be honest, today to really put our best foot forward, or my best foot forward. So yes. Thank you.
We do have terms of reference and it clearly outlines, so it might be good for everybody just to refresh themselves with the terms of reference as far as like our meeting frequency. So there are sort of guidelines and limitations to our meetings. And, you know, I always say this committee is a beast, but it's been, you know, a bit on the quiet side. And I think that's because the nature of some of the sensitivity with consulting with First Nations. And so we haven't really had a lot to report to the committee on. But with that being said, I still looking at this recommendation that's on the floor right now. I feel like we could go either way with, you know, if we want to vote on this pre-feasibility study, or, you know, the idea of, you know, maybe some of us aren't as familiar with groins as, you know, Glenn and Rick. And I appreciate the knowledge that you do bring to this committee. It's extremely helpful for a lot of us that don't have that same knowledge and understanding. And I do feel like getting some of that knowledge and that history of what's been worked on previously, as much as I know that you know, we want to get right to work and do this, get this approved, this pre-feasibility study to explore the use of using groins. It is costly to do feasibility studies. It is an additional body of work, and I'm not saying that it's not needed, but it might be helpful for this committee to sit around the table and be fully informed and engaged in work that has gone on and studies that have been done using groins in the city. And I mean, we can do one of two things. We can vote on this recommendation as it stands on the floor, and, you know, or we can make an amendment to it. But I'm hesitating on letting the mics keep going right now because I feel like we're going in circle, to be honest. You know, we've all had, you know, 4 or 5 times to talk, and I don't want to limit anybody, but I just don't want to talk in circles. So I really think that we need to take a look at this recommendation. I think we need to vote on it. And and start with that. That's sort of where how I'm feeling right now. So I'm going to call the question. The recommendation is that the Waterfront Stewardship Committee recommend to council that staff perform a pre-feasibility study in 2025 to explore the use of using groins to protect the bridge. So, okay. Okay, Councillor Grove is consulting me here, so no, that's good. Thank you. It's so all in favor of the recommendation? Okay, so we have Glenn Willing and Rick McKay in favor, and opposed. Anyone opposed to the recommendation? Okay, so that recommendation is defeated, gentlemen. So I will move to the adjournment. Oh, Councillor Grove has something to say, and because he's a first-time speaker, I'm going to let him speak.
Yeah, thank you very much, Madam Chairman. I was just wondering if there's some way we could speak to the urgency I sense from the members of the protection of the bridge. And I would ask for reassurance or some indication perhaps from staff, Mr. Burhill, if you could speak to that a little bit, because I picked up so many sort of fragmented little pieces from what you've said and what others have said. I feel like we're watching it. I feel like we have information about the problem with the bridge and the protection of the bridge. Am I right? Or do we need to give council, recommend to council that we perhaps have them look or ask for more observation, as committee member Mr. Willing has suggested, this notion of observing and what that might mean in terms of a formal observation program for the winter. And perhaps if anybody's spoken to the crab fisherman that's out there every day, he probably knows better than anyone what's going on. Thank you.
Thank you for that question, Councillor Groven, through the chair. Yeah, so if I could start by saying that the city, through its engineering department, is actively monitoring and undertaking a maintenance program for the bridge. So engineers have looked at what's needed to keep that bridge safe and functioning as intended. And right now there's crews that are doing maintenance and protective work to that bridge. I think what the concern that's been levied today at the committee is the threat through a catastrophic failure through, say, a extraordinary winter storm. Certainly, we've looked at that in the past, and it's a potential for that bridge to be damaged or destroyed in a catastrophic storm. There's also the threat associated with the tsunami. So one of the previous studies was a tsunami impact assessment that Associate Engineering performed for us, and it looked at the different risks that we're facing relative to our infrastructure at the waterfront, including the bridge. So there are those threats to the bridge that are on a different plane necessarily than the day-to-day maintenance and management of the bridge. So I just don't know if that answers your question, but yeah.
Ian, is it possible for the committee to see some of those reports, like those assessment reports?
Certainly, it would be staff's pleasure to prepare a summary of those previous reports. I think we have done that in the past. Going back several years now, but we have packaged up some reports. But to clarify, are we talking about the ongoing program of maintaining the bridge? Is
that and just some of the impact assessments from like major storm events and how that would impact potentially the bridge, tsunami, things like that, like any kind of reports related to environmental impacts specifically on the bridge, if there's any material that perhaps you have that could be circulated to the committee?
I think staff would be happy to take direction from the chair to at the next scheduled meeting to put it together an annotated list of previous staff reports and studies.
Okay, yeah, I think that would be great. So if you can take that as direction for the next meeting, it would be great to have that material for review.
Thanks.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, so I think that brings our meeting to a close. I'd just like to thank everybody for being here and being so incredibly engaged today in conversation. So if I can get a motion to adjourn. Just need a Ms. Gibbons and anyone all approved? Yes. Okay, great. Adjourn. Thank you.